Hey, Reddit. I never thought I'd be writing here, but life has thrown me into a place I don't know how to navigate. I could use some perspective. I'm William Blackwood, a tech guy through and through. My life's been about innovation, late nights, and chasing that next breakthrough. It's what I've always been good at. But that focus came at a price: my family. My wife, Sophie, and I have been married for 12 years. She's a sharp, passionate woman who used to light up whenever we talked about our dreams. Then there's Amelia, our 10-year-old daughter. She's the only thing in my life that doesn't feel like a series of missed opportunities. But as much as I love them, I've been distant. Too many missed dinners, forgotten anniversaries, and bedtime stories replaced by conference calls. Last Thursday, I stayed late at work, as usual. My team was debugging a major issue on a client server. By the time I wrapped up, the parking lot was empty. The kind of quiet that makes you uneasy. I was halfway to my car when I heard footsteps. Before I could turn, someone grabbed me. The next thing I remember was waking up in a hospital bed, hooked to machines and barely able to move. My ribs were cracked, my face swollen beyond recognition. The doctors said it was a miracle I survived. Apparently, a bystander called 911 after hearing the commotion, but the attackers got away. Sophie and Amelia came to visit me that night. Sophie looked tired, her eyes avoiding mine. I thought it was just the stress of the situation, but there was something else, a wall I couldn't break through. Amelia clung to me, her small hands shaking. It was the first time I realized how much I'd been missing. A few days later, detectives came to update me. That's when my world crumbled. They told me Sophie wasn't just being distant because of the attack. She'd been having an affair with Isaac Gall, Amelia's English teacher. I didn't know how to process it. This wasn't just some stranger. This was someone who knew my daughter, someone I trusted around my family. I asked Sophie for the truth, but she spun half-hearted denials and excuses. "It's not what you think," she said, her voice cold, like I was interrogating a stranger. Every word felt like a dagger. Now, I'm lying in this hospital bed, broken in more ways than one. I don't even know where to start picking up the pieces. What would you do in my shoes? How do you handle betrayal this deep while trying to heal from something so physical? Part of me feels like I deserve this for putting my work above my family. Another part of me wants to burn it all down. Thanks for all the support on my first post. I wasn't sure if anyone would care, but reading through the comments gave me some clarity. I promised I'd update, so here's where I'm at. After the detectives told me about Sophie's affair, I couldn't sit with it. I needed answers. She came back to the hospital the next morning, bringing me a fresh set of clothes and Amelia's latest drawing, a picture of our family. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Sophie, we need to talk," I said as calmly as I could manage, though my voice cracked halfway through. She froze, her hand lingering on the chair she'd just pulled up. "About what?" she replied, a little too defensively. "You know what," I said, staring her down. "Isaac Gall." Her face turned pale, but she didn't look surprised. She didn't even try to deny it this time. "I was going to tell you," she said. "Eventually." Eventually. My voice rose before I could stop it, sending a jolt of pain through my chest. "Our daughter's teacher, Sophie? How long has this been going on?" She rubbed her temples like I was the one causing her a headache. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. He was just someone to talk to." To talk to. I spat, my anger boiling over. "You don't destroy a marriage by talking. Don't insult me." Sophie sighed and sat down, her hands shaking slightly. "It started last year. I felt so alone, William. You were always working. I didn't want to fall into it, but I did. I'm sorry." Her apology felt hollow, like it was rehearsed, not genuine. I couldn't believe her audacity, sitting there blaming me for her choices. "And Amelia? Does she know?" I asked, the thought of my little girl finding out making my stomach churn. "No. Of course not," Sophie snapped, finally showing some emotion. "I'd never let her find out. I couldn't stop myself." "What about Isaac? Did you think of the damage he could do to her? To her education? Her life?" She didn't answer, just stared at her hands like a child caught lying. That was answer enough. When Sophie left, the nurses had to sedate me because my heart rate was spiking dangerously. I kept replaying the conversation in my head. The betrayal wasn't just about the affair, It was about how little she seemed to care about the consequences. Later that evening, the detectives returned. They'd been looking into the assault and found something unsettling. They asked me, "Do you think your wife's relationship with this man could be connected to your attack?" That question hit me like a brick. "You think Isaac had something to do with this?" I asked. "We can't rule it out," one of them said, "but we don't have enough to confirm anything yet. It's just a lead." I didn't know what to believe. Did this man Sophie claimed was just someone to talk to send people to attack me? Or was this just a random act of violence? Either way, it left me wondering how much of my life I could trust anymore. Amelia visited me later that night. She brought a book she wanted us to read together, something about space exploration. She curled up in the chair beside me, her tiny hand resting on mine. I didn't let go of it for a second. I realized then that no matter what happens with Sophie, I need to be better for my daughter. I've been absent for too long. This attack, as horrible as it was, woke me up. Amelia deserves a father who's present, and I won't let Sophie or Isaac, or anyone, take that from me. Now, I'm torn. Part of me wants to confront Isaac directly, but another part of me knows that's not the answer. I don't even know what's going to happen with Sophie. I'm still in the hospital, barely able to stand, but I feel like I'm already fighting for my life in a different way. Things have escalated since my last post. I didn't plan for it to happen this way, but the confrontation with Isaac, Amelia's teacher and my wife's, whatever he is, finally happened. It wasn't pretty. After sitting with the detective's suggestion that Isaac might be connected to the attack, my head was spinning. I couldn't just stew in the hospital, doing nothing. So when Sophie brought Amelia to visit me again, I asked her to stay behind after Amelia left the room. "I need to meet him," I said flatly. Sophie's face tightened. "William, that's not a good idea," she replied. "You're not in any condition to." "I don't care," I snapped, cutting her off. "He's been around my family, my daughter. He's taken something from me that I can't get back. I need answers." Sophie hesitated, but eventually, she relented. "I'll talk to him," she muttered, avoiding my eyes. "I'll arrange something." It was the next day when Isaac came to see me. Sophie had called him and apparently convinced him to come. I don't know what she told him, but he showed up at the hospital looking nervous. The nurses wheeled me into a private room so we could talk. When Isaac walked in, I saw him clearly for the first time. He was younger than me, probably mid-30s, with a smugness about him that made my blood boil. He wore a tweed jacket, like some kind of caricature of an intellectual. "I wasn't sure about coming here," he began, his voice irritatingly smooth. "Sophie said you had questions." I didn't waste time. "Did you know about the attack?" I asked bluntly. Isaac looked caught off guard. "Attack," he said, feigning confusion. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me," I growled. "Two guys nearly beat me to death in a parking lot, and the detectives seem to think you might know something about it." He raised his hands defensively. "I had nothing to do with that, I swear. I'm just as shocked as you are." The anger in me boiled over. I tried to sit up straighter in my wheelchair, but the pain held me back. "You've been sleeping with my wife for a year, and you want me to believe you're innocent in all this?" Isaac shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I regret what happened, okay? But Sophie, she needed someone. You were never there for her." I slammed my fist on the armrest, wincing at the jolt of pain. "Don't you dare try to justify this. You had no right. And you call yourself a teacher? What kind of example is this?" He didn't answer right away, just looked at the floor. "I didn't come here to argue," he finally said. I care about Sophie, but I didn't mean for it to get this messy. That's my family," I hissed. "You had no business stepping into it." Isaac didn't stay long after that. He mumbled some half-hearted apology and left. Watching him walk out, I felt like I'd lost a fight I wasn't ready for. It wasn't enough. Nothing he could say would ever be enough. When Sophie came back to the hospital later that day, I confronted her too. "He denied everything about the attack," I told her. "But why would the detectives even think he was involved?" Her face went pale again, just like before. "I don't know, William," she stammered. "Maybe they're just looking for a connection that isn't there." "Are they?" I shot back. "Or is there something you're not telling me?" She didn't answer, which told me all I needed to know. Now I'm left with more questions than ever. Did Isaac send those men, or is Sophie hiding something even darker? I don't know how to keep piecing this together while trying to recover and be there for Amelia. I didn't think it could get worse, but it has. After Isaac left and Sophie's reactions gave me more doubt than clarity, I decided to dig deeper. I wasn't about to sit around and let them keep me in the dark. The detectives came by again, and I told them about my meeting with Isaac. They didn't seem surprised by his denial. "We're still looking into it," one of them said. "But there are some inconsistencies in Sophie's timeline. That's where we'd start if I were you." That was all I needed to hear. As soon as Sophie visited later that evening, I brought it up. "The detectives think you're lying to me," I said, my voice cold and even. "So why don't you just come clean now?" Sophie froze mid-step, the bag of fresh clothes she'd brought for me slipping from her hand. "I've told you everything, William," she said, but her tone betrayed her. She sounded rehearsed, like she'd been practicing her lines. "You didn't tell me about Isaac until they did," I shot back. "And now your story doesn't match up with theirs. What else are you hiding?" Her face flushed red, and she turned defensive. "What do you want from me?" "I already said I was sorry. I want the truth, Sophie." My voice rose enough to send a nurse peeking through the door. I waved them off and focused back on her. "If you don't give it to me, I'll go straight to the detectives and let them tear your story apart." That seemed to shake her. She sank into the chair beside my bed, her head in her hands. "Fine," she muttered. "You're right, I haven't told you everything." She looked up at me, tears brimming in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen this act before. "I didn't know Isaac was going to be such a problem," she began. "When we started, he got clingy. He'd text me constantly, ask where I was, what I was doing. I told him to back off, but he didn't listen." My stomach churned. "So what? He got possessive, and you just let it go on?" She nodded. "I thought I could handle it. But then he started showing up at places unannounced. Work, Amelia's school events, even the grocery store. The thought of that man lurking around my family made my skin crawl." "Did you tell anyone?" "No," she whispered. "I thought it would stop. But then you got attacked, and I don't know. I thought maybe." "You thought maybe what, Sophie?" I pressed, my voice sharp. She hesitated, then finally said it. "I thought maybe he did it." I didn't want to believe it, but when the detectives asked about him, it made sense. I didn't tell them because I was scared. The room felt like it was spinning. I couldn't tell what was worse, the betrayal of the affair, or the fact that she'd kept quiet about Isaac's behavior, knowing what he might be capable of. "I can't believe this," I said, shaking my head. "You've put Amelia and me in danger because you were too scared to deal with him. How could you let this happen?" Her tears flowed freely now, but I didn't care. I'd given her so many chances to tell the truth, and she chose to protect herself instead. "I'll talk to the detectives," she said through sobs. "I'll tell them everything." "Good," I replied, my voice cold. "Because if you don't, I will." I barely slept that night, replaying her words in my head. Isaac was more than just some mistake, he was a threat. And Sophie's lies had allowed him to get this close. The thought made me sick. Now I don't know how to handle this. Should I push her to leave, or let the detectives do their job and see where this leads? How do I protect Amelia when I can't trust her mother? Every time I think I've hit rock bottom, I find out there's still farther to fall. Reddit, things have taken a turn. For better or worse, I'm not sure yet, but at least I'm not sitting in the dark anymore. After Sophie's partial confession, I told the detectives everything she admitted about Isaac's obsessive behavior. They said they'd look into it and encouraged me to focus on my recovery. Easier said than done. 2 days later, Detective Harris came back with an update, and what he told me left me reeling. "We've had our eye on Isaac Gall," he said, "and we uncovered something interesting. Apparently, Isaac had a history of inappropriate behavior with other women, former coworkers, and even a parent of another student at the school. None of it ever escalated to criminal charges, but there were complaints. Quiet whispers that were swept under the rug. He had a pattern. Do you think he sent those men to attack me?" I asked, trying to piece it all together. Detective Harris frowned. "It's possible, but we don't have enough evidence yet. What we do know is that he's been lying low since your attack. That's suspicious in itself." That wasn't all. The detectives found a series of text messages on Sophie's phone between her and Isaac, one she hadn't mentioned. In these messages, Isaac was pushing her to leave me, even threatening to tell Amelia about the affair if she didn't. The manipulation was sickening. One text stood out: "He doesn't deserve you. If you don't end it with him, I'll make sure he's out of the way for good." When Detective Harris read that out loud, I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Out of the way for good," I repeated. "What does that mean?" "We don't know yet," Harris admitted. "It could just be bluster, but given what happened to you, we can't ignore it." I was furious. Furious at Isaac for being the predator he is, and furious at Sophie for letting it go this far. But there was no time to dwell on it. The detectives said they were bringing Isaac in for questioning, and they'd let me know how it went. That evening, Sophie came to see me again. She looked drained, like the weight of her lies was finally catching up to her. "The detectives called," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're questioning Isaac." "Good," I replied, not offering her any comfort. "He needs to answer for what he's done." Sophie sat down, wringing her hands. "William, I'm sorry. For all of it. I never wanted things to get this bad. You think sorry is going to fix this?" I snapped, my patience gone. "You let this man worm his way into our lives, and now look where we are. I'm lying in a hospital bed, Amelia's future is hanging by a thread, and you're only sorry now." She didn't have an answer for that. Instead, she broke down, crying into her hands. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but the bigger part of me couldn't bring myself to do it. I've been a fool for too long. Later that night, I got a call from Detective Harris. "We've finished questioning Isaac," he said. "He denied everything, of course, but there's more." "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself. "We found evidence that Isaac hired 2 men for a job around the same time as your attack. It's not enough to charge him yet, but it's a strong lead." Hearing that was like a punch to the gut. So it wasn't random. It wasn't just bad luck. Isaac sent those men to hurt me. To get me out of the way, as he put it. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? The man who was supposed to be teaching my daughter about literature was out there orchestrating violence against her father. And the woman I'd built a life with had handed him the keys to our family. I'm meeting with the detectives again tomorrow to figure out the next steps. Sophie wants to be there, but I don't know if I can even stand to look at her right now. All I know is I need to protect Amelia, no matter what it takes. Reddit. I thought I was prepared for anything, but today proved me wrong. The meeting with the detectives happened, and Sophie came along despite my reservations. What unfolded has left me questioning everything, again. We sat in the small windowless conference room, Detective Harris at one end of the table, me at the other, Sophie to my right. Harris wasted no time. "We've been digging deeper into Isaac Gall's activities," he said, sliding a folder across the table. "And we found something we think you need to see." Inside the folder were photos. Surveillance stills, time-stamped from a week before my attack. The images showed Isaac meeting with 2 men in a coffee shop downtown. The same men who, according to the detectives, fit the description of my attackers. "Do you recognize either of them?" Harris asked, his tone measured. I shook my head, anger bubbling under the surface. "No, but I think we both know why they're there." Sophie's face had gone pale again. "That doesn't prove anything," she said quickly, her voice defensive. Harris raised an eyebrow. "We're not here to debate it, Mrs. Blackwood. We're presenting what we've found. And what are you going to do about it?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. "You have pictures, texts, and a pattern. When do you arrest him?" Harris sighed. "It's not that simple. We're building a case, but we need solid evidence, something that links him directly to the attack." I clenched my fists, wincing as the motion sent pain shooting through my ribs. "And in the meantime, what?" "He gets to keep teaching kids and walking free." "That's not our call," Harris said evenly. "But we flagged his name with the school board. They're conducting their own investigation." Before I could respond, Sophie interrupted. "William, you need to let them do their job." I turned to her, my frustration boiling over. "Let them do their job? That's rich coming from you. You've been lying to me for months, and now you want to act like the voice of reason." Her eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. "I made mistakes, William. But I'm trying to fix them." "Fix them?" I spat. "You've done nothing but make things worse. If you'd been honest from the start, maybe we wouldn't be here." The room fell silent, tension thick in the air. Finally, Harris cleared his throat. "There's one more thing," he said, pulling out a second folder. Inside were more text messages, ones Sophie hadn't disclosed before. They weren't just between her and Isaac, they were between her and one of the men in the photos. "Sophie, can you explain this?" Harris asked, his tone carefully neutral. Her hands trembled as she picked up the papers. I don't know what this is," she stammered. "They're messages from you to one of the men we believe attacked your husband," Harris said. "They were sent the day before the incident." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. "You were in contact with them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie, tell me this isn't true." She shook her head frantically. "I didn't do anything. I don't know how those messages got there." But her denial didn't matter. The damage was done. Harris ended the meeting shortly after, saying they'd continue investigating and keep me updated. Sophie tried to talk to me as we left the station, but I couldn't look at her. Every step felt heavier, like I was carrying the weight of her betrayal and the doubts creeping in. When we got back to the hospital, I told her not to come back. "You've done enough," I said coldly. "I need space." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. Whether she was involved in the attack or just lying to cover for Isaac, I couldn't trust her anymore. Not with my safety, and certainly not with Amelia's. Now I'm sitting here, trying to process what just happened. Sophie's lies are deeper than I ever imagined, and the more I uncover, the less I know what's real. Asked Sophie not to come back, but she didn't listen. She showed up the next morning, looking desperate. "William, you have to believe me," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know those men. I don't know how those texts got there." I couldn't bring myself to respond. I just stared at her, waiting for something, anything, that felt like the truth. Finally, she blurted out, "Isaac must have sent them. He had access to my phone. He could have done this to frame me." Her words hit me like a truck. Isaac framing her? It sounded absurd. But then again, could he really be that manipulative? Why would he do that? I asked, my tone sharp. Sophie hesitated. "Because I told him it was over. A week before your attack, I cut him off. He didn't take it well." The timing lined up. But was this another lie? Or was Sophie finally telling the truth? I told her to leave. I needed time to think. Whatever the truth is, it feels like I'm fighting a battle on all sides. After Sophie's latest revelation, I reached out to Detective Harris. If Isaac had access to Sophie's phone, they needed to know. Harris agreed to look into it, but his tone was skeptical. "We'll subpoena phone records," he said. "But if Sophie's telling the truth, it's going to take time to prove." That wasn't reassuring. Time wasn't on my side, not with Isaac still free and Sophie's credibility in question. Later that day, Harris called back with an update. "We found something," he said. "Your wife's phone pinged near Isaac's apartment the night before your attack." My heart sank. "What does that mean?" "It could mean she was there," Harris said. "Or it could mean her phone was. Either way, it's not helping her case." I didn't know what to think anymore. Sophie swears she's innocent, but every new piece of evidence makes her look guiltier. Things took an unexpected turn today. I got a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. You don't know the whole story. Isaac." I stared at the screen, my blood boiling. The audacity of this man to reach out after everything. I debated ignoring it, but decided to forward the message to Detective Harris instead. Harris called me immediately. "Don't engage," he warned. "If he wants to talk, let us handle it. He might slip up." It felt good to know they were watching him, but it also made me wonder what Isaac was playing at. Was he feeling cornered? Or was this another manipulation? The waiting is eating me alive. I feel like I'm caught in a web, and every move I make only tangles me further. Sophie came by again today, unannounced. She looked frantic, almost unrecognizable. "William, you have to believe me," she pleaded. "Isaac's dangerous. He's trying to ruin us both." Her words felt hollow, but something in her eyes was different this time, fear. "What aren't you telling me?" I asked, keeping my tone calm. She hesitated before whispering, "He threatened Amelia." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "He said if I didn't keep quiet, he'd tell her everything, and make sure she hates both of us," Sophie said, her voice breaking. I didn't know what to believe anymore. Was this another lie to save herself, or was Isaac truly this unhinged? I told her to leave and let the detectives handle it. For Amelia's sake, I can't afford to take any chances. After Sophie's bombshell about Isaac threatening Amelia, I couldn't ignore the pit in my stomach. It felt like every piece of this nightmare kept pulling me further into chaos. I called Detective Harris immediately after Sophie left. She says Isaac threatened their daughter? Harris asked, his tone sharp. That's what she claims, I replied. But at this point, I don't know what's real and what's just another one of her lies. Harris sighed. We'll follow up. If there's any truth to it, it adds weight to our case. But truth or not, I couldn't let it sit. I spent hours thinking about how to protect Amelia. She's just a kid, and none of this is her fault. That night, I asked my sister Claire to take her for the weekend. She's been through a lot, I said, trying to mask the urgency in my voice. I think she could use a break. Claire didn't ask many questions, which I appreciated. She and Amelia get along great, and I needed to know my daughter was somewhere safe while this storm raged on. The house was eerily quiet without Amelia around. I used the time to start putting the pieces together, going back over everything Sophie had said and everything Harris had shared. The timelines, the texts, the photos, none of it added up neatly. Sophie was either deeply involved or the most unlucky person on the planet. Then, late that night, I got another text from the same unknown number as before. This is your last chance to talk before things get worse. Isaac. My heart raced as I stared at the screen. Was this another threat? Or desperation? I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded it to Harris again. He called back almost immediately. We're closing in on him, he said. Don't engage. The more we can get from him, the better. The next day, Harris called again with another update. We've subpoenaed Isaac's phone records and emails, he said. There's enough to tie him to the men we suspect were your attackers. That should have felt like a victory, but it didn't. So why isn't he in cuffs yet? I asked, frustration bubbling over. We're building a case, Harris replied, his voice calm but firm. Rushing it could jeopardize everything. Trust me, we're getting there. That wasn't good enough for me. Not when Amelia's name had been dragged into this mess. I decided to confront Sophie one last time. She came to see me at the hospital that evening, looking like she hadn't slept in days. Do you have any idea how bad this is? I asked the moment she walked in. She nodded silently, her eyes downcast. Isaac's texting me now, I continued. He's not just threatening me anymore, he's threatening our daughter. So tell me the truth, Sophie. Were you involved in the attack? She shook her head vehemently. No, William. I swear. I didn't know he'd do something like this. I never wanted you to get hurt. Then why did your phone ping near his apartment the night before? I pressed. And what about the texts between you and those men? Tears streamed down her face as she said, he forced me to come over. He said if I didn't, he'd show Amelia everything. He took my phone when I was there. I think that's when he sent those messages. I didn't know what to do, William. I was scared. It sounded plausible, but I couldn't ignore the voice in my head whispering that this could be another one of her lies. I'm done with the excuses, Sophie, I said firmly. If you're telling the truth, prove it. Go to the detectives and tell them everything. If you don't, I will. She nodded, wiping her face. I'll do it, she said. I'll tell them everything. Whether she'll actually follow through, I don't know. But one thing's clear, I can't rely on her anymore. My focus has to be on Amelia and making sure she's safe. Reddit, I'm hanging on by a thread here. If Sophie's telling the truth, she's a victim too. If she's lying, she's complicit. Either way, I'm done giving her the benefit of the doubt. After Sophie's promise to come clean to the detectives, I tried to focus on Amelia. Claire kept sending me updates, photos of my daughter laughing, playing with her cousins. It was the only thing keeping me sane while everything else fell apart. But Sophie's story kept nagging at me. I called Detective Harris to check if she'd followed through. She came in, he said. Her statement was, interesting. Interesting how? I asked, bracing myself. She backed up what she told you, that Isaac threatened her and may have used her phone to send those messages. But there are still gaps. It doesn't explain why she didn't come forward earlier. I hung up feeling more conflicted than ever. Sophie might be telling the truth, but her silence had let Isaac's threat spiral into something much worse. Then, as if things weren't already chaotic enough, I got a call from Isaac himself. William, he said, his voice calm, almost mocking. We should meet. Just the two of us. What makes you think I'd want to meet you? I spat. To clear the air, he replied, as if he hadn't appended my entire life. There are things you don't know. About Sophie. About everything. I wanted to hang up, but curiosity and anger held me back. Where? I asked. Isaac gave me a location, a park near the hospital. Tomorrow at noon, he said. Don't be late. After the call, I immediately informed Harris. He wants to meet, I said. Do not go alone, Harris warned. We'll be there, but you'll have to act natural. Let him talk. The next day, I was wheeled into the park by a nurse, pretending it was just another part of my recovery. Isaac was already there, sitting on a bench with a smug smile plastered across his face. You're looking better, he said as I approached. Cut the small talk, I replied. What do you want? He leaned back, his expression calm but his words dripping with malice. Sophie's not who you think she is, William. She's been playing both sides. What are you talking about? She knew about the attack, he said. Maybe she didn't plan it, but she didn't stop it either. She wanted you out of the way just as much as I did. It felt like the ground shifted beneath me. You're lying, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. Isaac smiled wider. Am I? Ask her why she didn't warn you. Ask her why she kept quiet about the men I hired. Before I could respond, Harris and 2 other officers appeared. Isaac's smugness faltered as they approached. Isaac Gall, Harris said, flashing his badge. You're coming with us. Isaac tried to argue, but it was over. The officers cuffed him and escorted him away, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Was Isaac just trying to drag Sophie down with him, or was there truth to his words? Either way, I knew one thing. I couldn't trust either of them after Isaac's arrest. I confronted Sophie. I couldn't shake his parting words. He said you knew about the attack, I told her bluntly. Is it true? Sophie froze, her eyes wide. I didn't know William, she stammered. Not until after it happened. After. I pressed, my anger barely contained. She broke down, sobbing. He told me they'd hurt you if I didn't do what he wanted. I thought it was just a threat. I didn't think he'd actually go through with it. Her words hit me like a punch. And you didn't warn me? I was scared, she cried. I didn't know what to do. Her excuses only deepened the cracks in what little trust remained. I don't know if she's a victim, an accomplice, or both. I haven't been able to stop thinking about Sophie's latest confession. She admitted to knowing Isaac's threats might be real, but claimed she stayed quiet out of fear. Fear for herself, fear for me, fear for Amelia. It's hard to sort out what's real and what's just another excuse. But life doesn't stop. Amelia came back from Claire's today. When she walked into my hospital room, her face lit up, and for a moment, everything else faded away. She climbed up onto the chair beside me, her little hand brushing against mine. Dad, look, she said, pulling a drawing from her backpack. It was a picture of us, her, me, and Sophie, standing together under a sunny sky. That's beautiful, sweetheart, I said, doing my best to sound upbeat. She smiled, but her face quickly grew serious. Are you and Mom okay? Her question caught me off guard. Why do you ask? She hesitated, fiddling with the corner of the drawing. Mom's been crying a lot. And Aunt Claire said you needed space. Did I do something wrong? My heart broke right there. Oh, Amelia, no. This has nothing to do with you, I said, pulling her into a hug. Sometimes grown-ups just have problems they need to work through. Is it about Mr. Gall? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Hearing his name from her lips made my stomach turn. What do you mean? Mom said he wouldn't be teaching anymore, she said. She said he made bad choices. I had to swallow the lump in my throat before answering. That's true. He made some very bad choices, and now the adults are making sure he can't hurt anyone else. Good, she said firmly. He was weird sometimes. My chest tightened. Weird how? He'd ask questions about our family, she said, her brow furrowing. Like where we went on vacation or what you did for work. It was creepy. I forced myself to stay calm. Did he ever say anything mean to you? She shook her head. No, just too many questions. I promised her she wouldn't have to see Mr. Gall again. She nodded, seemingly reassured, and changed the subject to her upcoming science fair. But her words stuck with me long after she left the room. Isaac wasn't just manipulating Sophie, he was trying to get close to Amelia. The thought of it makes my blood boil. Later, Sophie called to check on Amelia. I couldn't hide my anger. She told me Isaac asked her questions about our family, I said. Did you know that? Sophie went silent. Then, in a shaky voice, she admitted, he mentioned her a few times. I didn't think it was serious. Not serious. I snapped. He was grooming her, Sophie. You let him get that close to our daughter, and you didn't do anything. Her voice broke. I didn't know what to do, William. I thought I could handle it. You thought wrong, I said coldly. You failed her in every way. I won't let this happen again. Now more than ever, I know I have to protect Amelia. I can't trust Sophie, and I certainly can't let Isaac's shadow linger over my family. I thought I'd seen the worst of it. Sophie's lies, Isaac's threats, Amelia's innocence being pulled into the chaos. It all felt like the bottom. But nothing could have prepared me for what came next. This morning, Detective Harris called. We've got enough to charge Isaac, he said, his tone steady. But there's a complication. A chill ran through me. What kind of complication? One of the men involved in your attack has agreed to cooperate, Harris explained. In exchange for leniency, he's giving us the full story. My pulse quickened. What did he say? There was a pause, and then Harris dropped the bombshell. The attack wasn't Isaac's idea, William. He was brought in after the plan was already set. Someone else hired those men. I felt like the room was spinning. Who? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Sophie, Harris said. According to the witness, your wife approached them first. She couldn't pay up front, so Isaac got involved to help fund it and handle the details. She claimed she just wanted to scare you, make you step back from work and focus on her and Amelia. But Isaac escalated it into something far worse. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My hands gripped the phone so tightly that my knuckles turned white. Are you sure? We're sure, Harris said. We're bringing her in for questioning today. I hung up and sat there numb. Sophie. My wife. The woman who cried to me, begged me to believe she was a victim, swore she was scared for our family. It had all been a lie. Every tear, every excuse, every frantic apology, just a cover for her betrayal. The door to my hospital room swung open, and Sophie walked in. Her face was pale, and she clutched her phone like it was a lifeline. William, she said, her voice trembling. You have to believe me. The detectives are wrong. Isaac is lying to save himself. I stared at her, the words caught in my throat. Say something, she pleaded, stepping closer. Was it worth it? I finally asked, my voice hollow. Her face crumpled. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I just wanted you to see me again, to see us. To see you. I snapped, anger surging through me. You almost had me killed, Sophie. You dragged our daughter into this mess. And for what? Because I worked too much? Because I was chasing a future for us. Tears streamed down her face, but I couldn't feel anything for her anymore. I didn't know Isaac would take it this far, she sobbed. I thought. You thought what? I interrupted. That hiring thugs to scare me was justifiable? That you'd get your picture-perfect family back after all this? Before she could answer, Detective Harris appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 officers. Sophie Blackwood, he said, his voice firm. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit assault and other charges. You have the right to remain silent. Sophie's face twisted in horror. William, please, she cried as the officers cuffed her. I did it for us. For Amelia. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I watched as they led her out, her cries echoing down the hallway. When the door closed behind them, the room was silent again. But the silence wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. Everything Sophie had done, everything Isaac had pushed her into, had shattered the life I thought I had. That evening, Amelia came to visit. She was carrying her science project, a solar system model with little foam planets dangling from strings. Dad, she said brightly, holding it up. Look. Saturn's my favorite. I forced a smile, pulling her into a hug. It's amazing, sweetheart. You're going to win for sure. Her smile faltered. Is Mom okay? Aunt Claire said something bad happened. I hesitated, my throat tightening. Mom's going through some things, but you don't have to worry about that. I'm here for you, always. She nodded, her small hand gripping mine tightly. Are we still a family? Her question hit me harder than anything Sophie or Isaac could have done. Of course, Amelia, I said, my voice firm. We're always a family, you and me. No matter what. That night, after Amelia left with Claire, I sat in the quiet hospital room and let myself cry for the first time. Not for Sophie. Not for what we'd lost. But for Amelia, and for the years ahead that would be harder than she deserved. But one thing was clear, this is where the rebuilding starts. Not with lies, not with betrayal, but with the truth and a promise to be the father Amelia needs. Reddit, I don't know what the future holds, but I know this, I'm walking away from the wreckage, and I'm taking my daughter with me. Whatever happens next, it's for her. She's my everything now.